Partnerships and Communications Advisor at the Yield Hub. And I'm super excited to, be here with you today to have a super important conversation. So for those of us who are new to the Yield Hub, we call ourselves a learning and facilitation platform that uses action learning, a problem solving method used to generate innovative solutions to complex solutions to develop new and creative ways for adolescents and youth to get involved in SRHR. And so we convene and engage adolescent and youth SRHR stakeholders to reflect and change practices in the way that they support partnership with adolescents and youth in SRHR work. So you'll start to hear a little bit about our action learning work as we proceed. But before we dive into the content of today's session, I'd like to ask our speakers to briefly introduce themselves. So I think we can start with you, Anna.
Alrighty. Hi everybody. My name is Anna
Hi.
Aguilera. Hopefully, yeah, you can hear me okay. I work in gender health. My focus is adolescents and youth, and have had the great pleasure of being one of their two organizational representatives for the Action Learning Cycle. And I should mention, yeah, I'm based in the United States, in Chicago, and that's why it's so dark in my background. Happy Friday.
All right. Thank you, Anna. Kapila, are you here with us?
I
Do we
think we
have
might have
Kapila?
lost Kapila. He was checking his internet. Maybe he had
Oh, no.
some connectivity.
Yeah, he just wrote to me on email. So he's trying to sort out his internet connection. I'm so sorry, guys. Uh, but yeah, seeing as this is a very intimate space, I'll invite the rest of the guys on here to just say hi as we wait for our other speaker to get back to us. Hello, anybody? Somebody say hi. Oh, it's so awkward. It's so awkward when your speakers don't show up and then you lose some of them. Hi,
Okay, we,
Liz.
we will have a good time. You know, it's okay. Maybe
Yeah,
everyone else will
let's-
also join in. We could all be speakers today.
yeah. So hopefully everyone feel free to share your thoughts and your perspectives as we go along. So yeah, I think I don't know. I'm not sure if we should go on or if we should wait for Kapila. I'm trying to figure out what to do here. Um, yeah, I think we need to give this a little bit of a moment just to see if Kapila can join us. Hi, Sharifa. Lovely to see you. Thank you for being here to support the session. Hi, Liz. Yeah, I would like to be where you are. I'm in Nairobi at the moment. Hi, Kapila. Are you back? Can you hear us?
Yeah. It was a heavy rain, so there was some signal issues, but I'm back. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry for that. Yeah, so yeah. allow me to hand it over to you to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Kapila Rasnaik. I'm from Sri Lanka. I'm a member of Menengage Alliance, and I'm a steering committee member of South Asian Menengage Alliance. So I'm happy to be here, as well as I was part of the Yield Hub initiative also. So yeah, I use basically art-based tools to talk about violence prevention, and especially for the prevention of violence against women and girls. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much for introducing yourself. So I'll just briefly, dive into why we're here today. And so this webinar was structured, or we decided to host this webinar in celebration and in commemoration of the 16 days of activism. And as we were thinking about what we would like to talk about and how to anchor it to the work that we've done with our incredible partners, as you've just heard from Anna and Kapila, we thought about talking about structural violence and how it's embedded within the SRHR system, and how we can amplify our voices to address it. And so, just very briefly, structural violence refers to a form of violence where social structures or institutions harm people by preventing them from meeting, their basic needs or achieving their full potential. And so this is very different from physical violence, which is very direct and visible. Structural violence is indirect, and it's often embedded in unequal systems and social arrangements that shape our lives, and it is often perpetuated through norms and policies and practices that systematically disadvantage certain groups. And so there are ways in which it manifests in the SRHR field, uh, and we will be diving into that a little bit later on. But that some of these examples are access to resources and opportunities, policy and representation, looking at how uh, the lack of inclusive policies that recognize the specific needs and challenges of different groups results in underrepresentation, and also just stigmatization and cultural norms. So we see that from these sort of ways that it manifests, it has a significant impact on how young women and gender diverse youth are able to contribute to the SRHR field. And so some of these ways is with regards to professional growth and contribution, their mental health and well-being, and even the quality of SRHR services themselves. So that's what we'll be diving into in this session. Uh, Once again, anchoring it on the work that was done in our first ever action learning cycle on gender and intersectionality. So yeah, that's I'll dive right into the session questions. We will be having a bit of a plenary discussion, and then afterwards we'll have a bit of a Q&A. So if you have any questions for those who've joined us, or any thoughts, feel free to share them. We're excited to hear your what you have to say. So yeah, I'll just dive right into the first question. So, how can we collectively tackle the biases and discrimination that hinder young women and gender diverse from youth from accessing education, funding, and professional opportunities in the SRHR field? I think I'll start with Anna.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, there's so many things we could do and should do, but we can't do it alone. So I think what's helpful for me is we always start with ourselves. So I always start with myself and my own team and my own organization, and reflecting on what are we doing currently that may intentionally or unintentionally perpetuate inequality or provide situations where there is inequitable access and make the situation worse. And I say that because I don't think anyone intentionally says, yes, we always, of course, we don't want to provide young women and gender diverse young people all access to all of these things. I think as a sector, we work in the nonprofit sector. We also tackle a very taboo subject among many others in the international global development world. So I think many of us would like to think that we are here for a common good, and yet we are also um, socialized in communities and societies where inequitable norms are everywhere. So a lot of it is also internalized. Maybe we don't recognize. And I say that as someone who thinks about this every day. There's still things that I do and others do. So around me. So I think being self-aware is number one, because we all do these things, whether we want to admit them or not. Who is invited to a webinar? Who is invited to a specific opportunity? How are our internal promotions and career development structures? Who is leading our programs? Is it a majority of one type of group? And oftentimes, what we see is it's lacking young women and gender diverse young people. And that's because we don't create the enabling structures for those people to thrive. It's not because they don't have the right education or the right experience or the right expertise. It's because we've created structures where it becomes really difficult for them to take on these leadership positions. And then sometimes when they are able to, they're not set up for success, or the expectations that we have of them are so vast that we're like, well, of course this happened. And so I think we really need to take a step back and think about what each of us can contribute and what we're doing that's probably making it worse. And then we can take collective action with others to challenge certain structures. Maybe they're certain governance structures, maybe there are certain donor structures where we're forced into inequitable situations. But I think we also have to take responsibility for that. And through, having seen many sides of this as a young person who has gone through a lot of this inequity, and now also as a person who is responsible in some ways for creating more enabling structures, it puts me also in a position where I'm constantly thinking about the things that I'm doing that may or may not perpetuate inequality. And I think the more we think about it, the better it is. So it's not to say that all of us are doing bad things. It's just to say that if we don't constantly think about what we are doing as individuals and then as part of structures, then we can't put it on all on the donors or all on the government or all on certain groups. I think we all have a part to play. So that would be my Friday morning reflection. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's such a great way to start, because a lot of the times we're very ready and very fast to sort of point the finger outward and say they should do this and they should also do that. But rarely do we hear, let's start with myself, or, let's start within ourselves. So that's really sort of a great opening remark, coming from you. So we're off to such a great start. So Kapila, over to you.
Yeah, so am I audible? I think my signal now working properly.
Yeah.
Okay, so one
Yes,
thing I
you are
wanna I
absolutely.
wanna initiate, like, who created the structure. So we are the people who created this structure. So then again, structure now controlling us. The structure now making barriers. The structure
Mhm.
now creating gender-based violence, gender inequality, violence against women and girls. And for an example, so when the British Empire came to Sri Lanka,
Mhm.
so they created 365A penal code. It prohibited LGBTIQ rights. So India changed this right, and a lot of even British, the Europe, they changed these rights, but still Sri Lanka following. Why? Structure still existed because we didn't change our law, we
Mhm.
didn't change our land rights, because still we are following the same structure without without uh, se- without without any sense, because because earlier it was a structured patterns of law, and now people are changing it because it created some barriers for particular community, or it created barriers for human beings, for their freedom of expressions,
Mhm.
opportunities, and and the education or jobs. That's why I think we have to step back again, and we have to rethink how, this every structures we have to create for humans freedom, humans respect, consent, and the opportunities, and for their human rights. But if we are unable to change these structural barriers, then it creates violence, it creates discrimination, it creates a lot of power disparity between human beings. Especially, it creates a lot of issues for women and girls. So I think that's the place where we have to work with men and boys. So even part of the Men Engage Alliance, we always try to transform masculinities, and we work with men and boys with a partnership with women and girls also to prevent gender-based violence, and to talk about this, the structural violence and how it affects to whole structure as a system. So therefore this is not
Mhm.
about the institutional structures and the law structures. Again, when it comes to this mental algorithm, what I call mental algorithm, we have a YouTube algorithm. That's like that. We have a mental algorithm. So our behavior, our attitude, we have to change accordingly. So if something affects to other person, if something affects to other human being, I think we have to rethink again. We have to restructure. We have to intervene with the law integration, as well as what is our responsibility for others space, because this is finally, it's all about how the government or the politics created uh, to carry patriarchal structure, and the sometimes it's all about masculinities also. So that's why uh, we have to rethink again to law changes as well as policy changes, and not only implementing policy, always it should have a practical intervention. So therefore, even these conversations not for webinar, but this is our part of life. This is not the project will disappear sometime, but this is our part of life, because we came to this world to support each other. We came to this world to create some structure with the humanity, with the consent, with the respect, and with the love. So then let's create that structure. Then we can prevent structural violence if we can go for the humanity structure. But the first step, I think we have to start with education. Education is the main part, because I closely work with young people and the children, as well as with the adult. So it's difficult to change adults' mindset because they grown up in a certain way, but it's easy to work with children. So therefore, my I really now prioritize the thing, like we can work with young people and children most of the time. It will create sometime these structures. It will create beautiful structures where humanity exists. Yeah. So this is my opening remarks. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Kapila. I think one of the, most profound things that you've talked about is, you know, the role that men have to play in transforming, the society that we've created. And, you've talked about we're in systems that we've created ourselves. So if it isn't the consequences of our actions, you know, and so it's very important. It's just really profound to start off from such a, uh, you know, point of view, thinking about, these are the systems that we've created. So how do we dismantle them ourselves? And there's the aspect of how do men engage with issues around, violence against women and girls. There's the issue of education playing a really huge role in, how we can shift norms, cultural norms, and how we can transform our society from one that sort of, impedes the ability of women and girls to, be safe and to thrive and all those things. And, moving from what I like to call our patriarchal shackles into a, towards a world that is freer and, more compassionate, really. And that's honestly, it's really inspiring to start a conversation based on what it is that we can do within ourselves, rather than, what can other people do for us, or what can we expect other people to do. So that's really great to start us off. And Kapila, you mentioned something around, policies. So I just want to probe a little bit further into that. How do we practically develop and implement policies that recognize and address the needs of young women and gender diverse youth, that also leads to better representation in decision making roles?
Yeah, so when it
You
comes
can.
to, yeah, so I like to give you an example. Like in 1956 onwards, so the SRHR field in Sri Lanka, when it comes to South Asian context, Sri Lanka was the best, the when it comes to SRHR, sexual and reproductive health and rights, because we were started, introducing family planning as well as constructive methods among females, among men, and also family planning association did a big role for that. And also currently UNFP and other agencies, they are doing a biggest role. So therefore, I can see this kind of implementation because of the even 19 after 1956. So the introduction of uh, sexual reproductive health rights to young people and for adults, it created a huge, changes in the society and in the education. But still, when we talk about family planning, sometimes, so the religious leaders, they come into schools and they're stopping these discussions. So still this myths around and stereotypes around SRHR field is going on. But we should not stop our duty, because before 10 years also I was talking the same thing, and still I'm talking the same thing. I think we have to talk because it's like what we are eating every day for our physical body to maintain our physical health. We have to discuss again this social health also. This is called social health. So we talk about these stereotypes before 10 years, and we implemented some policies before 10 years. It's not so it's not enough. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Can you
yes,
hear
I
me
can hear
now?
you.
Okay. So
Yes.
yeah, it's not enough. So we have to every day we have to work on these issues, because every day new community coming, new ideas coming. The media and other uh, political, some regimes, they creating again another layer of stereotypes, or other kind of what you call uh, this. They also carrying this patriarchal structure. So therefore we have to every day work for policy interventions, as as you mentioned. So not enough policy interventions when it comes to decision making of women and girls. We have to rethink again why we are creating policies for what. So that's the place we have to think about the practical interventions. So as you mentioned, so it may be, it can we can start it from our colleague, from our friend, from our family, from our organization, and from our public space. So so that's how we are supporting for policies. So like that, because we have so many policies, even Sri Lanka. But the practicality of these policies, how much we how much it affects to create a harmony in the society for the prevention of violence against women. So that's an issue. So that's why I think policy interventions we should explore through our education system, through our community programs. So it's a legal reform, but for this legal reform, we need a supportive mechanism in the community level. So we are engaging with actions. So therefore, sometimes it's a huge concept like policies. Sometimes people are like clapping so much, because we created the policy. But finally, again, the implementation, follow ups, that's the process important. So I think
for the decision making process, it's very important to uh, go back to our institutions, our organizations, our civil society, community, civil society organizations, community-based organizations. So I think that's the place where really we can discuss about these policies, because we can't change maybe we can't change the politics behind these policies, or I mean politics in the sense like we can't change maybe the base structure, but we can start with a small step. It's like because I'm using forum theater also sometime to change this power structure. So therefore we're not going to change the big people, like we're not going to change the king or queen or the president, but we are starting with our people, people who grounded. So therefore we have to start this policy discussion with the grounded people, not people who live in the air, because because finally this everything have to give some supportive mechanism for what we are doing, for the prevention of violence against women and girls. And it should heal men also, because men and boys also part of this system. Therefore this whole development idea also, I think we have to change some names, change some slogans. Like, of course still we have to talk about women empowerment. People are using still vulnerable women. So then I think we have to rethink about these slogans also, because if we are using same term very longer time, it will again re-establish another form of violence. So therefore when it comes to policy and decision making, and especially for SRHR and for the prevention of violence against women and girls, for gender equality, this slogan, some terms also we have to change for the structural changes. So that's, I think you got my point. So yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Uh, Anna, over to you.
Yeah, inclusive policies, I think, was the question, right? How do you develop them? How do you keep them going? And, as a person who doesn't develop policies every day, but often has to work within the confines of many policies, it could be, oftentimes it's like, think about it like those big level national policies, like the national youth strategy or the global strategy for this for young people. But also it could be a policy of your internal human resources policies, your internal promotions policy, your internal gender equity policy. And I feel like, to me, the more or less there are four things that if we all could do better, we would all be better off. So I think the first one is, how do you develop responsive policies? And I think maybe the most basic answer, but I find to be true, and yet we still don't do it, is asking young women, asking gender diverse young people what their needs are and what would help them address the barriers they're facing and what would help them advance in their hopes and dreams and career goals. Someone like my mom often tells me, and I bring this in my professional life, like, you never truly know what someone wants until you ask them what it is. And it's not the fake kind of asking where we come with a nice little plan and we're hoping for validation, and we say, oh, is this what you want? Would you like to say yes? And no, it's taking a step back to actually asking and what people need, instead of coming up with a predefined plan. And then the second part is actually listening. So first we have to ask meaningfully and truly, but then we also have to listen. And I think our sector is not very good at listening. We kind of assume, oh, well, this research study or this global evidence base tells us that young people really need this. And while it may be true, we're coming in with these preconceived notions of what people need, and it harms our ability to really take a step back and actively listen to what people are saying. And that's why I think the point on meaningful adolescent and youth engagement in everything we do is so important. Because if we don't meaningfully engage young people, we'll never be able to ask and listen to what it is that they want to tell us. And so if we're able to better ask, and if we're better able to listen, then I think the third step in this is, creating more responsive accountability structures for the implementation of whatever policy or thing that it is that you want to do. And we also don't like to do that, right? We like to create our nice little policies that are look really nice and maybe have a great storyline. And, I'm guilty of this too. But then we're like, oh, okay, now it's off to these people so they can implement it, the government sometimes, or, some big UN agency or something else. But I think those accountability structures are so important because many times you can have the best policy in the world, and we have many examples. I'm sure everyone on this webinar could think of a policy that maybe was designed and crafted so nice and the right words, and you're like, yes. But then when it gets to implementation, it totally flops, right? Because it doesn't have resources, because people like to cherry pick. Oh, I like this part of the plan, but this part of the plan is too taboo, so I'm not really gonna touch it, or I don't think so. But creating those structures to hold people accountable is so important, because without that, it doesn't matter how inclusive your policy is. And then I think the last part for me that I'm becoming as I get older and maybe aging out is just calling people out, right? Like when plans or don't go things don't go to plan, or accountability structures are not in place, and you show up to a webinar or a meeting or whatever it is, and you're like, really, this is the best you could do? I think just being honest and calling it out, like, why do you have one young person on this panel of 10 experts? Or why is the young person only allowed to speak about youth issues, right? Or why is this grant have all about young people, and then there are no resources for young people? It goes all to the INGO, right? Calling it out, I think, as I get older, like, it's just part of the process, right? And not in a way that's trying to be like threatening or really put people in positions where you're like, you did these terrible things, but saying like, hey, this is the situation, right? You don't have young people in your decision making structure, and that's a problem, and we need to fix that. And how are we going to fix it? And I think it's okay and very useful to call it out, but oftentimes, especially as you get up in this, from local to global structures, we like to have things perfectly aligned so that we don't get called out. But I think sometimes we need to do a little bit more of the calling out, and I say that for myself and for others who work with our organization. We fully accept and understand that we're not doing the best that we could. Every day is a learning process, and so I invite everyone to collectively call each other out, because we're never going to get it 100% right. But if we keep following this, trying to make it sound right and feel right and not upset too many people, we're never going to get there. So that would be mine. Back to you, B.
Thank you so much. You're absolutely right. Just thinking about how you cannot create policies for people without engaging them. Otherwise, who are you creating the policy for? And then that also usually has a very huge impact in terms of its practicability, because if you didn't involve people when you were creating the policy, then when it's one and done and you're talking about implementing specific pieces of it, they're like, I didn't ask for this. This does not help me. This does not, change the quality of my life in any way. And then, back to square one, so to speak. So that's, a super important thing to, highlight, but also just thinking about how it's important to move from developing the policies themselves that end up sitting on shelves, but how do we move into, from policy into practice, and how do we ensure that we're actually making meaningful change in the spaces that we're working in? That's a really great thing to hear from you. And also, finally, the issue of calling ourselves out, that's super important, because I've found myself in spaces where we're even scared to ask ourselves or even ask the people who work with us the difficult questions, because we're scared that the answer that's going to come is not going to be a positive answer, you know. But how do you move, how do you grow, how do you learn if you're even scared of the truth? And the truth is what helps us grow. And I think particularly in a space of, global health and social health, without the truth, without, really highlighting what the lived experiences are and what the lived truths are, we're, we're essentially just going to keep, walking and running around in circles without actually, making any meaningful progress in the work that we're doing. So that's, super important to note. And there's also a quick comment in the chat from Liz, who says that evidence needs to be complemented with lived experiences within whatever context that you're working in, which is absolutely brilliant. You know, as you develop policies, as you implement projects, as you implement initiatives, your evidence needs to go hand in hand with the lived experiences of the people that you're trying to work with. I don't want to say serve, because we're moving away from narratives of people and especially adolescents and youth being beneficiaries, but really just being equal partners in the work that we're doing and in the interventions that we create. So thank you so much for your incredible insights so far. We're off to such a great start. But before we continue, I'd like to invite Richard to say hi to the group. He's been able to join us. Hi, Richard. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello. Finally, I'm able to join in. Technology. I think as you age, you can use them less and you cannot navigate them. So I'm glad to be here and also to be part. I'm the Action Learning Groups lead for the Yield Hub, and have had the opportunity to also, work with all of you here, especially with Anna on the first Action Learning Groups, where we discuss more, intersectional feminism or gender mainstreaming. And I think it falls within the discussion we are also having today. Also with Liz from HTD Exchange, we've had the opportunity for them to support our Action Learning Groups, and also to see Kapila here as well. And so, yeah, glad to be able to be part of today's discussion. And finally, I'm in. I will learn more and adapt to technology over time.
We hope. We can only hope, Richard. Your struggle with technology is ever evolving. But we're so glad that you were able to join us. So I think I'll actually direct the next question to you first, just to get to throw you into the deep end of this conversation. So my next question revolves around cultural norms and how can, advocacy and the work that we do around, for instance, collective action learning at the hub challenge traditional beliefs that we have around gender and sexuality in the SRHR field, and support those who defy gender norms or advocate for gender diversity. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I see a comment. We should not assume that all young people are tech experts. Definitely. And I'm now a big advocate for that, because apparently, not apparently, in real life, I studied a master's in digital communication. And so people are like, why are you then struggling? I'm like, I studied policy, innovation, and digital inequalities. So how do we bridge the gap? So don't assume that we can all use. So it's very important. And back to your question, Beatrice, I think to first be able to, address some of this, cultural changes or norms that you talk about, I think at Hub, one thing we've begun to realize based on our first Action Learning Groups, one of the recommendations was also around the issue of gender and social norms. And I think sometimes there's still a lot of work that needs to be done around this area to understand what such social norms mean within different contexts. Because often we do a lot of, advocacy or specific initiatives with the understanding of trying to shift some of these norms. But where is the evidence or data being informing some of this advocacy or initiatives coming from? And does this evidence and data inform the advocacy in a way that is also culturally or it's context specific to the specific area or places that you are doing this. So I think one of the things that we want to do at the Hub is to see how we can expand some action learning around specific understanding when it comes to gender and social norms, because there are different factors that also influence some of these norms as well. And these factors could be traditional, they could be also more cultural, and it comes from different settings. So the argument here is, how do we begin to understand more? And so that we can shift those norms. So for example, when you come to Ghana, where I come from, you may understand that a lot of, the current gender, norms are deep rooted in certain cultures, certain traditions. How do we begin to understand them so that when we are designing some advocacy or initiatives or implementation plans, we make sure that it's informed by, some of this understanding within the local context, and that the change that we seek to make is a change that we work along with the youth, the women, the traditional leaders, because they are, let's say, they are those who hold the power, because it also ties to power dynamics and who holds that power. So it's very important that we begin to view how do these traditional leaders think about gender or gender roles? How do we young people even perceive their own involvement in changing just gender norms? Sometimes there's an expectation from either adult allies or donors on what we think are the issues and how we think we should do certain things to change the narrative. But there's also a different understanding from the youth or the people who live in the communities about what this means to them. So I think it's very important to expand our understanding. And the understanding does not necessarily mean, some more research or more donors or technical expert taking over the space, but it means going down to the communities, to the women, to the girls, to the youth, to understand, how do we change this with you? Who holds the power? How can we work with the power, the decision makers? And I think that is very important. So with action learning, what we do is we are practical and we want to understand more of this. And we are hoping that we are currently working on some concept notes to expand some of this understanding with some organizations that we have heard of are interested in expanding some of this understanding, because this is also really tied to shifting power to youth and shifting power to women, shifting power to girls, shifting power to gender diverse people. And so those are some of the areas that I think we need to expand our learnings on before designing frameworks, advocacy, and initiative. What is our understanding, and does our understanding align with those who are impacted at the end of the day? Because they are those that we have to work with to shift these norms.
You're absolutely right. Kapila, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so adding to what Richard said, actually, the I like to again talk about these cultural structures, some political structures, some sometimes this technological structure also. So it created many barriers for young people as well as for women and girls. For an example, when it comes to technological structures, so it has some structural patterns of patriarchal, patriarchal, what you call patriarchal perfume, because in Sri Lanka also most of the men and boys, they use technology, but when it comes to young girls, so there are limited number of persons have access to technology, and also the freedom of expression and decision making. How many women and girls, they can express their ideology in technologies, like through technology, through social media, or through any technical application? Because again, the technology exists patriarchy, and it created another form of violence against women and girls, and also it created barriers for sexual and reproductive health rights also. So for an example, we had 11 machines, like condom machines in Sri Lanka. So but unfortunately, uh, very less number of people going to take condoms from these condom machines, because we allocate funds and we did the policy changes. We you know develop this technology to have a comprehensive sexual education and know-how. So but without changing this mindset, so they're not going, because still they have that social barrier, stigma. It's called cultural, you know structural violence, cultural barriers. Therefore, I think the culture itself, what is culture? Culture is a learned behavior, so we can again relearn. That's the place where the education curriculum we should change time to time, because education is not the the fixed thing. It's always changing. It should change for human well-being. It's not for paper, it's not for MA, or it's not for PhD. It should create something for humanity. It should create something for human well-being. And when it comes to sexual and reproductive health rights also, so this attitudinal and behavior change is very important. Otherwise we will have a lot of technology, a lot of uh, good uh, tech applications, but the practical uh, attitudinal and behavior change. So then that's the place where we have to develop a behavior change communication campaigns. So we can start with schools, we can start with youth clubs, and we can start with media, because media is one of the socialization agents where we socialize in a particular way. But how many media are talking about SRHR rights, or sexual reproductive health rights? Even current media in Sri Lanka, when they promote pads, when they promote menstruational hygiene products, they're not telling the truth. They show in, like when they show in pads advertisement, so they put pink color or the purple color. They not put in the red color. Why? Because they feel like blood is bad or dirty blood. You know,
Mm.
this this is how these structures work. Advertising media. So, but they are promoting violence with a lot of red bloods. Even if we see this Indian movie, or any other, I'm not targeting Indian movies, but a lot of movies. So they are promoting violence with a lot of bloods, with a lot of knife scenes, lot of distractions, but they are not ready to show the real blood, real biological component through this advertisement. Why? Still we are covering that part like a sweetness, like kind of we are putting mask, so we're not showing the reality. If we show the reality, so pads have red blood, so people should accept it, because it's a biological component, it's a biological reality. But again, if you are covering this reality, again we are just going around, and we are far behind that. So therefore, I think we have to engage with media, we have to engage with cultural institutions like religious institutions. We have to work with maybe religious leaders, and we have to work with media stations, we have to work with advertising agencies, we have to work with singers, artists. So these things we talk already. But the final thing I want to mention, when we talk about the structure, it's important to have this infrastructure also, like an infrastructure. We have to develop the infrastructure also, so it will create a access to knowledge, access to know-how, access to right also. So therefore, when you create new infrastructure, we should understand how many disabled women and girls, how many men, how many women, how many people will get access from this service. Therefore, uh, creating a space is important, and how to go to that space, what kind of people will get benefit from this space, and what is my role for this space, that we should rethink. I think slowly these are changing. We will have a positive hope. The first thing we can do, what is my role, what is my, why I came to this world, who who are the people happy because of me, who are the people have peace because of me, who are the people enjoying biological rights, sexual and reproductive health rights because of me. That's the question we can ask individually. Then I think we can sleep nicely. Then mental health will exist. Therefore, promoting mental health and mental well-being, mindfulness, these are good practices for everybody in this current world. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. It's super interesting to, hear your perspectives, building on from what Richard has said. So I'll just hand over to Anna to share her perspective as well before I share my thoughts on the issue.
Yeah, sure. One thing I think we can all do better in terms of supporting those who perhaps go against or defy the traditional gender norms, and especially the gender binary, is creating safer spaces. I'm not sure that there's in all contexts a way where we're like, this is a safe space. We've defined it. But I think that there are always things we can do to create safer spaces so that we can better support those who, defy the norms. Because we also have to recognize that in many of the contexts that we work in our own communities and societies, people can risk so much by going against what has been prescribed to us or told to us in so many ways about what is normal and what is right and what is wrong. And many of us don't think enough about what happens when those of us who go against those norms go back to their religious communities, to their educational communities, to their families. That oftentimes we put people in really potentially dangerous situations, and especially gender diverse young people and adolescent girls and young women. And so we have to play our part and our duty to create safer spaces and to in some ways create a buffer when we can, to make sure that those who speak out and those who are very vocal are also supported as much as they can be. And also, I would say this is my plug for, every project or program or anything ever should have a do no harm framework. And because we really need to be so extra careful when we implement any kind of project or program to support the people around us who are really oftentimes not ourselves doing the day-to-day on the ground work of trying to defy and reconstruct and reimagine these norms that have real, tangible, harmful potential consequences for those people who feel that by defying or by reimagining these traditional norms, we're creating situations that where they have less power, and therefore that's how backlash often occurs. And a good example of this is, for a long time our field was like, only do work with adolescent girls and young women. And then, some of the projects would sort of ignore adolescent boys and young men. And that's when, massive amounts of backlash occurred, right? Because adolescent boys and young men were like, well, what about me? And does this mean and I think that, no one thought this was a good idea at the time, but that's how the funding structures were created and all of the projects and the programs started doing that. And that's what happened, right? We created these very unsafe situations where gender-based violence was even more pronounced. And then we were like, uh-oh, this happened, right? So every day and everything that we do, think about how we create safer spaces for everyone to be involved, but especially those people who have the most to risk and the most to lose. And then my second thing in advocacy, especially I think in the intersection of gender and age. So in my case, gender identities. and younger people. I think featuring in all of our advocacy work, but maybe more broadly our work in general, the voices of diverse groups of young people who have so many different intersecting identities, who can tell their stories in the way that they want to tell them and share their perspectives in the way they want to share, instead of sort of predefined talking points or things that we want them to say or we want them to do because that's what we want to come out of a global meeting or whatever it is. Because I think when we feature sort of a diversity of voices, people better understand that at the end of the day, we're all complex people with intersecting and beautiful and messy lives. And so we don't live in these boxes of like, this is gender and this is age and this is ability status and this is your one culture. We're messy, and when we normalize the messiness, we can create safer spaces where people can be their authentic self and express their gender in whatever way, shape, or form they want, or have that expression change over time, and that be okay. But I think we don't do ourselves any favors by creating sort of standalone boxes here where we talk about one topic or one identity within a specific group. I think that sometimes that backfires on us, and I say that as someone who's been through it. So back to you,
Yeah.
Bea.
All right, thank you so much. I had seen Richard's hand was up earlier, so I'll hand over the mic to you very shortly. But before I do, I just wanted to bring us back a little bit into the SRHR field in itself, in terms of like the people who work in the space and how that impacts people. And it's as Anna was talking about creating safer spaces, I was just thinking about how that's super important as well within the SRHR space, because this field does not exist in a vacuum, in the sense that everybody walks in, everybody who engages with the field or works in the field, comes in with their biases, they come in with their lived experiences, they come in with all the things that, they've been taught, the things that they're learning, the things that they're unlearning. And sometimes, that creates a melting pot of beautiful lived experiences, but it also creates, an environment where we are perpetuating the things that we've been taught, the things that we've lived through. And even when we talk about issues around, youth leadership and women's leadership within the field in itself, we see that as a reflection of what is happening within society in itself. And so as we think about creating safer spaces, and as we think about, having these honest conversations within the society itself, I think it's also particularly important to address these factors, these cultural norms within the SRHR space, so that the people who are working in the space, particularly women, young women, and gender diverse youth, so that we're also enabling them to not only thrive out in society, but also thrive in the workspaces themselves. So that's my little nugget. Richard, over to you. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think it actually falls in line with what you just said and what Anna also shared earlier on creating safe spaces. When Anna mentioned that, an example came to my mind. I was moderating an event in one of these international institutions, and there were youth advocates from all over the world, from Europe, from the Americas, from the Africa region. And one young person from an African country, because I'm also African, came to me and said, "Oh, I have been asked to speak on this, but in my country, it's a sensitive topic." And then I said, "Oh, okay. If you don't feel comfortable, tell the people you cannot speak on this because you don't feel safe to talk about it." But then immediately what came into my mind was, to what extent did the organizers of the event or just tell this person, understand that this is the country the person is coming from, and they are an advocate for sexual reproductive health and right, but they have to still be safe after this event and when they go back to their countries. And so when you ask them some questions, know that yes, they are there representing as a youth advocate from their country, but their safety is also important because they may say certain things, and when they go back home, there's no other space to protect them. And so it came to my mind also to what extent, it's important that those in the space, like when we involve young people, we should also be aware of their own safety. And they should say what they want to say and what they are comfortable to also say, and not always bring up all other issues and want them to talk about it. Because in the end, it's also very sensitive. And like B, you say, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. So that's just what I want to add, that it's important to also create those safe spaces as well.
All right. Thank you so much. We're all about creating safer spaces in the field in itself and in the societies that we live and exist in. So I'll dive on into the next question. And this is based on the learnings from the action learning cycle. So, based on the findings and lessons from the action learning cycle on gender and intersectionality, what actionable insights can foster inclusive organizations and make youth partnership the norm in the SRHR field? Particularly with a very specific lens or focus on addressing structural violence that young women and gender diverse face within the field. Yeah, I'm trying to choose who goes next. This is a very fun job. Anna, do you want to go next?
I don't know about want, but I will go. Yeah, so what are actions we can take, right? That's the question, to make youth partnership the norm, and also think more, thoughtfully about, as best as we can, sort of preventing gender-based violence from occurring in what we do. Did I get that right, B?
Yeah.
Okay. I think maybe there are some more standard things that lots of people have, organizations, individuals, institutions, whatever, and then maybe other things that could exist in the future that are maybe more cultural norms or organizational norms and values. So I think maybe the more standard is ensuring that, every organization or institution that you work with has robust safeguarding policies and procedures and mechanisms in place. I think this is, again, often one of those things that even if organizations or institutions have the policy, maybe it's not being implemented as robustly as it could. But I think safeguarding is really, really important in our sector, but especially when we think about working with young people, especially gender diverse colleagues who, again, are at increased, potential for experiencing violence just by simply, sharing and expressing their identities. And I think we need to be really careful and have those robust measures. I think I already mentioned Do No Harm Framework, but I'm just going to keep mentioning it because it's so important. And I think we don't do it enough and we don't talk about it enough, right? Like, no one, I would say, on this webinar, probably in our institutions, would ever say they want any form of violence to occur. Of course not. And yet we know it happens. And many a times it happens and people don't know about it or hear about it, or it's not managed and responded to in an appropriate way. And so that's why having these safeguarding policies are so important. Because they safeguard all of us in this sector, and all of us working on these issues day in, day out. So I think that's a pretty more, I guess, nuts and bolts thing of what we can do. But then you have the cultural, sort of organizational culture side of it. Is what are things we can do is creating cultures, that an organizational or a group culture where we constantly ask ourselves, like, what can we do better, and not necessarily harp on the things that we're doing, really well. I mean, it's nice. It's always nice to hear things like, yeah, you're doing this really well. And that, that's important. I don't want to undermine the importance of that. But I think when we get ourselves into a trap when we think like, ooh, we had this one initiative that was really good and super inclusive, and look at us, woohoo. And then we kind of forget about all the other things that maybe weren't as good. So I think this constant mindset, and I really like what Kapila has mentioned, is like if we constantly think about learning and unlearning and relearning, then we're in this mindset of incremental growth and change, because we also know that the topics we talk about are not static, right? Like I'm often reminded from some of my slightly older colleagues that 20 or 25 years ago, people didn't really talk about anything related to gender, really, right? And now we're in this situation where whatever topics are, hot button topics in the gender spectrum space, for example, will change in 5 and 10 and 15 years. So if we're constantly learning and open to learning about the things that we don't understand as well, and how identities can change over time, then that helps us, because then we won't get stuck on like, well, we had this one thing that was really good, so go us, we're really good. And it helps us be more inclusive overall. And then I think the last thing I'll say is, this is my more, having worked now in the bureaucracy more, creating specific measures of progress and success and indicators of success, or indicators for progress at least, are really necessary, because people move and change and grow from institutions or structures over time, right? Yes, we are currently affiliated with our institutions, but who knows, tomorrow or 5 years from now. And I think a lot of this work really, like, I don't want to use the word dies, but it really like falls off track when individuals who are pushing this work leave organizations or transition out of certain roles. And the only way to really keep it going is to create these indicators and structures that measure and monitor these indicators for progress. So for us at Engender Health, that means we have now an organizational, meaningful youth participation theory of change. And we also have organizational indicators that we report on somewhat regularly, that say, what percentage of young youth-led organizations on these proposals are we submitting on every year, or what are the resources that are attached or to certain projects, that how can we measure how many resources we're directly directing to young people and youth-led organizations, and or how many young people work at Engender Health. And oftentimes I think people are a little bit scared, because those numbers probably aren't what we would like to see. But again, if you don't measure it, many people say it doesn't count, right? So unless we have those structures, I don't think we can really make things long-term actionable, because it relies on individuals who are really championing something, instead of the structures that reflect, or the structures that guide how things are done. So that's it from my side.
You're absolutely right. I think we lost Kapila, so I'll just hand over to Richard.
Yeah, thank you very much, B. I think I would also, would you want me to answer the same question, or?
Yeah. Anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I will come back to the same on safeguarding. I think Anna also mentioned that, and having robust safeguarding mechanisms. Sometimes within organizations and institutions, it's like the one thing, not that we hate, but it requires very detailed, anticipating every situation. And if you are the one at the receiving end, you are like, what? This is just, too much. But when you are the one, for example, the example I gave about this person being uncomfortable with a certain question, this is something that should have been thought about in a safeguarding policy when inviting a young person or a young woman to a program. You have to think, and safeguarding is not always about physical safety, their interaction with others, what they are going, where they will stay. It's also about the work they are doing. So if I have someone coming from a country where they have an anti-LGBTQ plus law, and then because they are in Europe, I want to ask them about that, they would go back home. And so it's also about safeguarding, looking at some of these things. Like, it's not every space that has the same level of freedom, that has the same level of support, that has the same level of openness. And so that's also something we need to do to also protect the advocates or those that we work with. So the other point, I think Anna expressed them well, but what I wanted to bring back again was, again, the safeguarding, which is very, very important. My own example, growing up in Ghana, I have worked with Anna like since 2015, 16 on safe abortion issues in Ghana. And I remember those days I was with the IPAS Youth Advisory Board, and Anna and some colleagues came from their head office to interview us about the work we are doing and all of that. And at that time, we had to sign, these forms. And I will ask, can we say this, not say that? We were very enthusiastic. We wanted to say everything, but they reminded us that, do you want to say this? At that time, we did not have that full awareness that this was safeguarding even for us. So it's also to say that sometimes the young people you work with, they are not fully aware of what their own safeguarding is, because they are passionate, they want to go out there. And it's not always that they have that full understanding. But again, the organization should come with in mind that we want to safeguard you. It's not that we want to just get this information out of you and then, we let that go. So I think those were some good examples, even pictures, when you take them and all of that. Just to come back, it relates to the topic because those working in this space need that, especially the young ones.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. And one thing that I found to be very special about the Yield Hub's action learning cycle is the fact that, there's so many different initiatives and sort of learnings that are being created by different organizations. And, we'll plug the Do No Harm initiative once again on this webinar. But it's a really great example that, I might not have known about it, or somebody else might not have known about it, but by creating spaces for learning and unlearning and for sharing what works and what doesn't work, such as the Yield Hub's action learning cycle, we're able to see, and we're able to see what's working. We're able to have honest conversations about, what the lived experiences are for people, not just outside of the field in itself, but the people who are, giving up their lifeblood and their sweat and their tears to make changes within the SRHR field and ultimately the global health space. So I think it's very important to have such spaces, to have spaces to unlearn as well. So that's something particularly, important that we've seen with the Yield Hub action learning cycle. And this conversation is coming from said action learning cycle, and I would continue to advocate as much as possible for such spaces where we can have as honest as possible conversations, where we can call ourselves out, with humility, and call each other out as well, for our collective good. So thank you so much, guys. We're at the end of the webinar for today. So I just want to ask you guys to share your final thoughts or your final calls to action as we close out the 16 days of activism. And yeah, and we can see that, Anna, on your side, the sun is finally out, so yay. All right, yeah, so any final thoughts, guys?
Yeah, you have the sun now. The sun has risen where I am. No, my final thought is just, take care of yourself, because all of these topics are, difficult, and we're often, many of us are put in situations where when we think back, we're like, wow, I didn't think about that. I was put in this situation of potential harm, or, in a situation that you may not have wanted to be in. And so I think, doing what we can to, safeguard ourselves, and also, holding our institutions and our structures also accountable for creating those safeguards for ourselves would be important. For a long time, I didn't really get the self-care, prioritize your. People often said it, and it's just like, what does that mean? I don't really get it. I don't like yoga. Like, this doesn't work for me. I don't want to light a candle. But I think for what I've learned is what works better for me is protecting, sort of my own mental health in terms of recognizing when I myself need to take a step back, take a walk, do whatever works for me, and not in the commercialized way of self-care, but just in like, maybe I just need a cup of coffee, or one more thing. I need to log off early today. So I would say that. And I hope we can all take care of ourselves. And it's Friday, so I'm hoping you can do something that you really enjoy, all of you, this weekend.
All right. Thank you so much, Anna. Richard?
Well, I will just keep on the same track. It's important to take care of yourself. I feel I even need some self-care here myself. So after here, it's very important, because I think in this space we are dealing with very social, human things that are happening every day. We are not like there. We close from work, but we don't close, because the issues are things that affect our lives, our personalities, and these are issues we work on because we are also passionate about.
Right.
And over time, when you don't find that balance, which is difficult, it is difficult, because at some point and this also goes to youth advocate, young women, those in the space, we need ourselves in order to continue with the work we do. And the space is not even becoming friendly. It's becoming more, attacked, more oppressed with, yeah, we are seeing it everywhere with elections, with different governments coming into place with policy. So all this way in. So it's important that we do take care of ourselves in the most little ways. Sometimes, like Anna said, it could be there's this whole commercialized way about, self-care and whatever, which sometimes even our own organizations buy into it and provide that for us. And like, maybe that is good that they do it anyway, they think about it, but find your own way that works for you, that can make you just take a step back and just make sure you are in the right space, physically, emotionally, mentally, to just keep going. So those would be my final words.
Thank you so much, Richard and Anna and Kapila, who is unfortunately not here to share another nugget. He's been incredibly insightful. Just his words around compassion and how we take care of each other as human beings. I just thought that feeds very much into our final remarks around self-care and taking care of ourselves, because as Richard said, these are really integral societal issues that we're carrying with us each and every single day. And even as young people who work in this space, it is important for us to take care of ourselves. And as people, and even for people who might listen to this later, who are in positions of power and positions of privilege, I think it's important for us to create spaces where people are able to take care of themselves while working on such crucial issues. I know sometimes, I I'm very proud to call myself a feminist, and I'm often very happy to have conversations around gender equality and all of that. But there are times where I feel like, okay, this is a bit heavy. I might need to sit this one out so I can come back, even more energized and even more encouraged and motivated to talk about these issues. And I think that we need to create spaces for that within the organizations that we work with, the work that we work in and with, and even the communities that we engage with on a day-to-day basis. So that's super important. So as we close out the 16 days of activism, it's been really great to have conversations around what structural violence looks like in the SRHR space, and how it manifests, and how you know the effects that it has, and even how we can address it in the different spaces that we have. But what has been particularly profound during this session is just hearing our speakers talk about holding ourselves accountable, and even just the humanity of it all. There have been calls for us to be considerate of each other and considerate of ourselves, and that, I think that's a really beautiful way to not only end the webinar but also to end the week. So yeah, this is me signing out. I hope everybody has a lovely weekend. Take care of yourselves, you know and see you on the next one. Bye, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.